When the will was read, my stepmom and her kids were all smiles. They were practically giddy as they carved up what was left of my dad's empire, handing each other houses, companies, and shiny little trophies of success. And me? They tossed me an old, beat-up farmhouse way out in the country like it was some kind of joke. I sat there watching Melissa, my stepmom, and her kids, Jason and Brooke, sign off on everything my dad had built. The trucking company went to Jason. A couple of rental properties and a slick downtown condo. Straight to Brooke. Melissa got the controlling shares of the estate to keep things stable. It all moved across the table with the scratch of a pen, like entire buildings were being pushed around a board game. Then the lawyer looked at me and cleared his throat. To Tyler, he said, didn't even meet my eyes, the old Riverbend place, deed is free and clear. The words floated in the room like smoke. Someone coughed. Somebody else muttered, that shack. Brooke smirked, Jason checked his phone, and Melissa adjusted an earring like she'd already won. The truth? That place was barely standing. But I kept my head down. I could feel the little digs, the whispers, she's got nothing, she'll sell it for scraps, good luck out there. My fingers played with the cheap ring on my hand, the one my dad gave me when I was 13, the same year he rolled a map across the table and told me, land tells stories if you listen. He used to buy property the way some people buy art, on instinct. Sometimes he struck gold, sometimes he bled money. Toward the end, it was all bleeding. People called it bad luck, but I saw the weight on his shoulders. When the meeting wrapped, chairs scraped back and perfume filled the air. Melissa drifted close enough to toss a comment over her shoulder, at least it's got a roof. Brooke chuckled. Jason muttered something about little house on the prairie, and made a barn door gesture before sliding his phone back into his pocket. I didn't bite. My chest felt tight, but I stayed quiet, signing the papers with a steady hand even while my knees bounced under the table. The lawyer gave me a brief glance. Guilt? Fatigue? Who knows, and then it was over. Outside, the city roared. Heat bounced off the stone steps, horns blared, and a bus groaned past like it didn't care one bit about my new reality. A guy was hustling bottled water on the sidewalk, and I just stood under the sound of a city bus braking, letting it wash the stale courtroom air off me. I dug into my bag and pulled out the envelope. The deed felt paper-thin but heavier than anything else I owned. Everyone else had tossed that farmhouse to me like a bad joke. All right. Fine. Breathe. I grabbed a rideshare to the little storage unit where my entire life fit into 8 boxes and a lamp I'd found at a thrift store. The driver didn't say a word, and I didn't either. At one stoplight, a kid on a bike looked straight at me, gave me a small nod, like keep moving. My stomach growled. Hungry and proud all at once. By the time the city faded, I'd passed the last all-night grocery, the last row of tire shops. The road stretched out, got narrow, and the air swapped its smell of hot asphalt for dry grass. The sky opened wide. The radio buzzed static, then caught a preacher mid-sermon before giving up completely. Only the wind stayed. My fingers clenched tighter on the wheel every time the car rattled. I talked to myself, not praying, not exactly, just a promise. I'm fine. We're fine. We'll figure it out. When I finally rolled into Riverbend, the welcome sign was tired and splintered, and the gravel road looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The farmhouse sat waiting, 2 stories of peeling paint, a porch slouching like a shoulder under too much weight. Weeds owned the steps. A weather vane groaned in slow circles. Something inside clapped once, then settled. The air smelled of hay and old rain, like it had been holding its breath. I cut the engine and sat there in the thick quiet, letting the crickets stitch the dark edges of the field to the house. My heartbeat slowed to match the place. Far off, one neighbor's porch light blinked twice and disappeared behind the trees. No glow from the city. Just honest dark. I should have cried. I didn't. Instead, I did the smallest, most stubborn thing, I grabbed the handle. It was still warm from the day. I stepped out, gravel crunching under my sneakers, dust floating in the last bit of light. On the porch, my hand slid over the splintered railing, like shaking hands with ghosts. The key fought me but gave in on the second try. The hinges complained but opened. Inside, the air was cooler and smelled damp. My steps found a rhythm on the floor, wood, pause, wood. A moth bumped the window like it was testing it. In the kitchen, a tired-looking sink caught a weak gleam. A faded calendar hung on the wall, stuck on a June that felt like a lifetime ago. I opened a cabinet. Empty. Closed it softly. Every move careful, like not to spook the place. I took off my ring and set it on the counter for a second, just to let my fingers breathe. Then I slid it back on and let out a breath. Okay, I said, not loud, not weak. Just here. Night settled fast. The fields melted into one dark shape. Somewhere close, water moved, a creek maybe. My mind pulled up a memory, my dad, Mark, unrolling a map with that half-grin. Listen to the ground, he'd said. Felt stupid thinking of it now, but there it was. They thought they handed me scraps. Fine. Let them. I stood on that porch with my thrift store jacket pulled tight, leaning on the railing until it stopped creaking. The place didn't feel like a joke anymore. It felt like a starting line, quiet, rough, and absolutely real. Morning came slow. Sunlight leaked through torn curtains, laying gold stripes on the dusty floor. I woke on a couch that sagged like it was sighing. Its springs groaned every time I shifted. The smell of old wood and mildew clung to my hoodie. My phone buzzed, weak signal, but enough. The messages were exactly what I expected. Brooke sent, hope the farm rats don't eat you alive face with tears of joy. A photo followed, Jason leaning against some fancy car, comfort looks good on me. Melissa said nothing, and somehow that stung worse than their noise. I read the messages, locked the screen, and let out a laugh that was more hollow than happy. Wow, I muttered to myself. You guys really went all in, huh? I shoved my phone under a pillow. No reason to give their words any more air. Then I walked the house. Each room told its own story, floorboards soft and uneven, doors whining on their hinges like they hadn't been moved in decades. Cobwebs stretched across the corners like old lace. In the kitchen, a faucet dripped slow and steady, tap, pause, tap. Out of habit, I opened the fridge and laughed when nothing but stale air pushed back. Outside, the backyard was a jungle. Weeds climbed past my knees, and rusted tools lay forgotten where someone had left them years ago. For lunch, I ate gas station bread and peanut butter, leaning on the porch rail, crumbs catching on my sleeve. The field stretched wide and endless, crickets and cicadas working overtime, the air heavy with late summer. I tapped the empty jar with my thumb. Dad, if you could see me now, I thought. People in town always talk. In a small place like this, news moves faster than Wi-Fi. At the feed store, the woman behind the counter tilted her head. You're the Dawson girl, right? The one stuck with Riverbend? A guy in line gave a low laugh. Yep, I said, steady as ever, sliding cash across for a bag of seeds. Well, the woman said, sweet but sharp, good luck with that place. Folks say it's been a lost cause since at least 2 owners back. The guy behind me leaned in just enough to get his jab in. Yeah, heard the roof's about ready to cave. Hope you got insurance. He chuckled like it was his own private joke. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I smiled small, grabbed my seeds, and walked out. Outside smelled like clean hay from a passing truck. Better than the dusty air in that store. I took one deep breath and made a decision, let them laugh. I'll make this work. I planted, awkward at first, then more steady. My rows were crooked, my hands blistered, dirt packed under my nails. The sun beat down until sweat soaked my shirt. I hauled water from the creek, balancing buckets on the rocky path like it was some kind of test. At night, I collapsed on that couch, every muscle buzzing, the old house sighing along with me. Weeks slid by. Tiny green shoots pushed up, fragile but stubborn. I knelt close, brushed soil from my knees, and watched them sway like they already belonged there. Something shifted in me, a little piece of solid ground inside my chest. But some nights, the quiet was too much. I'd sit on the porch with my knees pulled close, watching the occasional headlights slide past on the road. Across the fields, neighbors' voices floated faint with the sound of old radios. "That poor girl," someone said once. "What she thinks she's doing out there? Her dad's money went to the others. She's just playing farmer." The word stung, but I kept my mouth shut. My fingers dug into the porch rail until the bite of the wood steadied me. Then I'd whisper to myself, "Keep going." The house became my teammate. I patched holes with scrap wood from the shed, covered windows with plastic, dragged a mattress upstairs so the mice wouldn't keep me awake. When storms killed the power, I lit candles, their flicker painting the walls warm. One afternoon, rain came hard and sudden. Water roared off the roof, carving new streams into the dirt. I stood right in it, boots sinking, arms wide, letting the cold soak me until I laughed, a sharp, breathless sound. "Still here," I told the storm. "Still here." Riverbend was keeping secrets. Out back, where the weeds strangled an old well cover, the ground dipped strange. I noticed it hauling water one evening, orange light folding the day. My boot hit a patch of soil that sounded wrong, hollow, like knocking on a door. I crouched, laid my palm flat. The ground seemed to shiver, just a little, like something under there shifted. My dad's words came back like a ghost, "Listen to the ground's quiet stories." I sat back on my heels, heart ticking faster. Fireflies blinked unevenly across the field, like they were trying to say something. "What are you hiding, old man?" I whispered to the dusk. That night, I couldn't sleep. The couch felt too small, my skin too awake. I stared at the ceiling beams until dawn painted them pale. By the time morning hit, one thing was clear: Riverbend wasn't just some busted-up farmhouse and a tangle of weeds. It had roots. It had history buried deeper than anyone realized. And maybe, just maybe, my dad had left me something more than a pity gift. It started with an old shovel. Not the shiny kind from a hardware store, but a dented, splintered thing I dragged out of the shed. The handle was cracked like tired knuckles. I went back to that spot where my boot had tapped something hollow and sank the blade in. The earth gave easier than I expected, like it was ready. Every scoop released that deep, wet smell of old clay. Hours passed, sweat running down my jaw, the sun turning the field gold, then red. Then, clang. The shovel bit into something hard. I froze, listening. A hollow echo came back, faint but real. My heart jumped. I dug faster, dirt flying until my hands cleared a half-rotten wooden hatch. The hinges were swollen and stubborn, but a rusted crowbar and some muscle cracked it open. Dust coughed up in my face. Below, darkness. Cold, damp air brushing my cheek like something breathing back. The smell of rust and earth. I grabbed my flashlight, lowered the beam, and saw stone walls fading into shadow. Fear sat in my throat for a second. I thought about Melissa's laugh, Brooke's smirk, Jason's dumb barn door joke. Their voices shoved me forward. I tied the flashlight to my wrist, slid down into the hatch, boots scraping wood before I dropped into the cool dark. The tunnel swallowed me. The walls were wet, the air thick. Dust sparkled like ghost stars in the beam. The ground sloped downward, pulling me deeper. My fingers trailed along the rough rock, grit grinding into my skin. My breath fogged in the chill. Then the tunnel opened up, a cavern, wide and arched. My light swept across wooden supports rotting in place, abandoned pickaxes, rusted buckets. An old mine. I knelt, ran my hand over the splintered wood. This was my dad's gamble, the thing he swore would pay off. Folks had called him foolish. Maybe the weight of failure finally broke him. But when my beam caught the wall, something glittered back, small at first, like a trick of the light. I brushed it with my sleeve. Tiny veins gleamed brighter. Gold dust. Real, catching the beam like it had been waiting for someone to find it. I laughed, a short, shaky sound bouncing off stone like company. My fingers clawed at the wall, a little fragment coming loose, dust sticking to my skin, metallic and sharp. "Damn, Dad," I whispered. After that, it was a blur of mornings. I came back with a fresh flashlight, gloves snug, chalk in my pocket to mark the tunnels. I mapped every twist, followed every hunch. I found the place where my dad had stopped, mere feet from a vein that streaked the wall like frozen lightning. So close. I could picture him down here, lantern dim, shoulders slumped, quitting just shy of the truth. The town, of course, noticed. At the diner, I'd hear it over coffee cups, "That Dawson girl keeps hauling gear out there. Waste of time. That land ate her old man alive." Someone else would add, "Maybe she's crazy enough to keep swinging." They'd laugh. I let them. Every snicker, every side comment just made the pick swing harder. Sparks flew. Every bucket I hauled felt like cracking another piece off their disbelief. And then came the day the wall opened, not a cave-in, just a slow giving way. The pick struck, dust rained down, and the shimmer came alive, white and bright, no longer hiding. I leaned my forehead against the cool stone, tears slipping hot down my cheeks. It was real. Solid. Unarguable. The ground had whispered, and I'd listened. Back at the farmhouse, I laid the fragments out on the table, proof that the joke was over. Candlelight caught the fragments on the table, scattering tiny suns across the worn wood. She touched them lightly, almost reverent, as if they were bones of a secret finally unearthed. Her breathing steadied. "They thought this place was my punishment," she murmured. "But this is my beginning." That night, lying awake, she didn't hear crickets or the groan of the old farmhouse. She heard engines in her head. Machines. Trucks. Factories. Alive and humming, powered by the gold she'd found. She pictured contracts with her name stamped at the top, not buried in fine print. Headlines flashing her face. The thought made her smile into the dark, a small, sharp thing. Riverbend wasn't just a broken house anymore. It was a gate. And she had the key. At first, the work was raw. Talia carried sacks herself, throwing them into the back of a borrowed pickup. Her hands blistered, her back ached, but each trip to the refinery was proof, gold was real, and it was hers. The first payout was barely enough to cover tools and groceries. She didn't care. The glow of possibility kept her going. Months blurred into a year. The farmhouse began to change, new roof, fresh paint stripping away years of shame. Trucks came and went. Contractors shook their heads at the girl who had somehow turned weeds into an industry. A sign went up, Riverbend Mining Company. The town muttered, laughed, doubted. Until the checks came. Until jobs followed. Until the girl they'd once pitied was signing their pay slips. The whispers changed. At the diner, people leaned in. "She's hiring. Heard she's building offices by the highway. Guess that land really did have something." One old man grunted into his coffee. "Looks like the laugh's on us now." Talia didn't gloat. She worked. Contracts spread across her desk, meetings packed her calendar. She learned the weight of risk, the edge of every decision. Late nights were spent signing papers by candlelight, her father's old maps close at hand. She wasn't just chasing his dream, she was finishing it. Stronger. Meanwhile, the family that once mocked her began to slip. Elaine's polished empire cracked, lawsuits, debts, whispers of poor choices. Paige sold the condo. Cole's luxury car was repossessed outside a nightclub, the moment caught on video and passed around town for a laugh. They had wealth without roots. And without roots, the storm took everything. Then came the day Elaine herself walked the gravel drive to Riverbend. Heels sinking in dust, makeup perfect but smile brittle. Talia stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching her stepmother approach the house she once called a joke. Elaine's voice was sugar over nerves. "You've done well. Maybe we could talk, there are opportunities." Talia didn't need revenge. Just truth. She tilted her head, steady. "Funny, you laughed when you handed me this place. But this house, this land. It gave me everything back. You kept the fortune. I kept the roots. And look who's still standing." Behind Elaine, a few neighbors lingered, pretending to pick berries, but really watching. Tables turned, one whispered. Hard, another answered. Elaine's shoulders slumped. No more performance left. She turned and walked back, her shadow long across the gravel. Inside, Talia sat at her desk again. Papers spread wide. Gold samples glinting under the lamp. She leaned back, breathing deep. The farmhouse creaked softly, like it approved. She glanced at the window. Field stretched wide and alive. Her father's words returned, "Listen to the ground's quiet stories." She had listened. And now, her story was anything but quiet. The farmhouse they mocked had become her empire. The mine they underestimated had become her legacy. The family that laughed had become the cautionary tale. Because sometimes the stone they reject becomes the cornerstone. And just like that, the farmhouse they mocked became the empire that buried their greed.